Hello, everybody. My name is Dick Clay, and I'm the president of the Filson Historical Society. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Heather Potter. Heather's topic is Archiving 101, Organizing and Caring for Your Family Photographs. Previously, she was a project archivist at the Kentucky Historical Society. Heather Potter received her BA in History at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, and her master's in Library Science with an emphasis in archives from Indiana University, Bloomington. Her research interests include Mammoth Cave, World War I, and genealogy and family history. I will now turn the program over to Heather and rejoin her after presentation to moderate questions as time permits. Heather.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'll just give me a few minutes to share my screen and then we'll get started. Okay, so I think hopefully everybody can see my screen, and I am just going to go ahead and get started. So family pictures are more than a photograph of a loved one. Each image is a historical document. These photographs reflect history, they inform us, they change our impressions of our ancestors, and tell the story of our family's past. Yet many families' photograph collections remain tucked away in the basement or attic. Today, I am going to discuss how to survey your family photos, how to prioritize, select, and organize, and some tips on sorting your materials. So I know you can't answer this, but how many of you have photo boxes that look like these? I show you these examples to let you know that this is a very common for family photos. We receive materials here at the Filson from families, as well as I have materials. The center image is a picture of my family photos that are, not the greatest being stored. So as you can see, they're not organized, items are not clearly identified, and boxes contain a mix of photographic materials that span oftentimes multiple generations in one box. So whether you have one box or 20 boxes of family photos, I always start the process the same, by surveying the collection to see what I have. By doing this, you will have a better understanding of what you physically have, and it can help inform you on how to prioritize future projects. This can be especially helpful for larger family photo collections. So there are a few things you need to do prior to starting. You need to make sure that you have plenty of time, so you're not rushed. It is important to set aside a set amount of time prior to starting. Sorting and organizing photos can be time consuming, but I promise it will be worth the effort. Next, I would recommend probably not doing more than 1 to 3 hours, as your eyes will get tired and faces and events in the images do start looking the same. You will want to make sure that you prepare a clean workspace so you can spread out materials. I recommend also building in time to clean up your materials. And you can keep a working projects box for this, as leaving materials out for extended periods of time can make them more susceptible to dust, dirt, and light. And last, you're gonna wanna gather supplies, a computer, pencil and paper. You wanna make sure your hands are washed, and grab a pair of gloves, whether they're latex or cotton gloves, to help you sort your materials. So once you have a designated space and a little time to work on your collection, you're gonna start by surveying, just to see what you have in those boxes. So your goal is to learn what you have and to document along the way. So there are lots of different ways that you can approach this initial survey of your materials, in ways that you can customize the survey to meet your needs. I recommend keeping it simple and creating a basic list And then you can always go back and add to it as you continue finding out more information. This is just the first round of exploring your collection. Oops. Sorry about that. So the two ways I recommend starting the survey. The first is to gather all your family photos in one central location. You can do this if you only have 1 or 2 boxes of materials. However, a lot of people have a lot of family photos and they're scattered throughout the house. So the other option would be to take a survey around your home. And I will show you 2 examples of how to organize these surveys in just a little bit. So whether you decide to bring all your materials into one central location or you decide to kind of survey your materials around your home, there's going to be several things that you need to keep in mind while going through your materials. You need to know an idea about how much materials you need to know the format and the date. You need to know identification, what are the materials of, and then you also want to record preservation needs. So how many envelopes, boxes, bins, or albums do you have? You do not need to count every single item within the box. Ultimately, you want to just notate the types of materials you're finding in each box. So knowing whether it's a box of slides or a box of photo albums will assist you later on down the road. What about format? What formats are represented in your family photo collection? Quantity and format will vary from family to family. Some families do not have a lot of photos. Some families will have a lot of photos. And knowing the formats can really help you date the materials. It will also help you determine how you should store the materials, as often different formats require different storage needs. So what kind of formats are in your collection? Do you have 19th century formats such as these, daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, tintypes, or cabinet cards? I recommend phototree.com as a place for you to learn more about specifically 19th century materials. And what about 20th century items, such as snapshots, photo albums, slides, and negatives? For more contemporary materials, a great resource that you can find online is through the Image Permanence Institute, and it's called the Graphic Atlas. This goes into goes more in depth to photographic formats and processes. You're also going to want to start identifying groups of images and include this in your basic description field in your survey. What are your images of? People, places, events? Do you have studio portraits of individuals? Do you have vacation, holiday, or celebration photos? What families are represented within the boxes? Is this your mom's family, your dad's family, another relative's family? This can be basic information in the beginning, but it can really help you relocate materials later on. Materials can also get separated, and so by notating a little bit more specific detail, you may often be able to reunite materials while you continue to organize. The last major thing you will want to note in your preservation survey, is going to be preservation issues. Has anything been damaged by water, pest damage? Are materials broken or faded or moldy? A great online resource for this is going to be How to Preserve Family Archives. This is a page that's through the National Archives website. So all of these things are really going to be important to note within your photo survey. So now that you have a better understanding of the idea, the types of information we want to gather, you want to organize it in an easy way for you to go back. So I want to show you 2 different ways that I've created to organize this data that you're going to be collecting. Remember, there are many ways you can take an initial survey. This is really just 2 examples. I've seen lots of them out there. So the first example is to organize by container number. What you will do is number all your boxes, folders, or envelopes. Each container number will have a corresponding line within your spreadsheet where you will be recording the basic information that we just discussed. So as you can see here, we have the container number. So box 1 will get a 1 in the spreadsheet, a number 1 on the physical item. I have also included container type and home location. These are a little bit extra. You don't necessarily need them if you don't have a lot of materials. However, if you're working with a lot of materials, notating how it's currently being housed can be helpful when retracking it down. The home location, this is where it's located within your house. And then you're going to include a brief description. These can be as in-depth or not in-depth as you want. So for instance, I've made a note. Container 1, it's a cardboard box. It's in a closet in my den. And in the box is a mix of old family photographs from when I was a kid. Some appear to be when we lived in New York. Others appear when we moved to Raleigh. So you're just putting down information as you see it. You're going to want a dates field. These do not have to be specific. It's just for start, they can be an estimate. So if you know the date, great. If you know the year, great. If not, you can just as here like 1950s or 1980s. It's just to get going. Next, you're going to have preservation issues. This is where if you notice any damage within that box, you can record it here, allowing you to go back easily when you move on. And then I have a note section. I always include a note section when I work with materials. This allows me to highlight some materials as I find them and can't work with them immediately. So for instance, in box 4, it's a group of photo albums. I found a great photo of my mom at Christmas and I want to flag it. So I notate that in here. Great photo of mom at Christmas, album with a blue cover, and I've flagged it. So these are just little notes to help you get back to that image easily. The second way you can organize your materials is to take out the container number and you're listing everything based on location around your house. So this is if you have a lot of materials or just a little bit, you've taken out the container number, you include the home location where it is, the container type, the description, some basic dates, your preservation issues, and your notes. Now, remember, you can change these fields to meet the needs of what information you want to capture. So if you're not comfortable with Excel, you can take notes in a Word document or it can be handwritten. The plus of having it digital is the document will be keyword searchable and you can rearrange the data more easily. But ultimately, you want a better understanding of what you have so you can then prioritize your projects and really start organizing. So for those of you who have already done this and want to know the next level of cataloging, I want to apply that same technique, but to go a step further. In the archives, there are numerous ways that you can describe materials. There's collection level, there is going to be what we call folder level, and then there's item level. The item level, as I'm going to show you here, is extremely time consuming. Each item or image will get a description. However, it can make your easier to go back and find your materials. So my husband had an old self-adhesive album that was his granddaddy's, and the images were starting to unstick and the album was in mediocre condition. So I evaluated it and looked at all the images to see if they'd be able to peel out easily. Please note that every album is different. If the images are glued down or have any sort of damage, I do not recommend dismantling your album. There are other ways that you can preserve the item. However, I was able to determine that I could dismantle this item, and I was even more ecstatic because I found in the front of the album a typed list of all the individuals in the album that his grandfather had compiled in 2006. This is an archivist's dream. So to start with this, what I did is I scanned my album and created a PDF. This allowed me to maintain a visual of the original order of the album. So as you can see here, I have a PDF version of the album. These album pages were loose, they were not bound. The album was in relatively good condition, so I was able to place these on a flatbed scanner. I do not recommend this if the album is fragile or damaged. You can always take photographs if you prefer to do this step. I also created his granddaddy's guide. I scanned it and created that as a PDF. So from here, I created an Excel spreadsheet, what I call a cataloging spreadsheet. And as I started carefully removing the images from the album, I would assign them a specific number. This number would go into my spreadsheet. It would become the number that would be penciled delicately on the back of the physical item. And then I also use this as my naming scheme for when I scanned the materials and named the file. So as you can see here, I've created just a very basic inventory. We have the image number, what page it was removed from. I transcribed the descriptions that were from that paper list, and I included a date column. So now that I had this basic information in a working spreadsheet, I was able to work with my husband who knew the genealogy of the family. And with his knowledge of the family history and my knowledge of family photograph formats, we were able to combine that information and date many of these images. So that's just a little peek as to how you can go the next level of description work if you've already done a basic survey of your collection. So whether you were just starting your family photo journey or you have started, but you're dragging your feet on some of those tough projects like slides, we can often get overwhelmed and don't know where to start. So this is where project planning is your friend. You've done the survey, you know the different segments of your collection, and now you can break it down into mini projects to make it seem a little bit less overwhelming. I do recommend tackling preservation issues or poor storage in the beginning prior to starting projects. But once those have been addressed, I recommend working toward organizing your collection as a standalone. You just want to organize everything, or you can organize in conjunction with a specific project that you may want to do. So for instance, you want to create a family photo album, a print book as seen here. So you've decided you're going to organize those 4x6 prints. Or you want to delve deeper into family history because you're researching a specific line and you haven't looked at your family photo collections for hidden clues. Or you just need to make storage space in your home. You have a whole closet full of photos and family materials, and you really need to tidy them up so you can have a little bit of extra storage. Ultimately, you get to decide where you start. And if you still don't know how to start, I would recommend starting with an easy project. Don't tackle the 2,000 slides as your first project. That's going to be a very daunting task, and you can build up to a project like that. So once you have your project in mind, your next step is going to be organizing the materials. You're going to take a box of your materials to your clean workspace and really spread them out on the table. The best way to organize materials is by thoroughly looking through your items and sorting them by categories. So in the beginning, these are going to be probably broad categories. For instance, it can just be a date range, 1950s, 1990s. You can have it more specific, October 2002 to January 2003. You can include a location, Louisville, Kentucky, 2003. As you continue sorting your materials, you may establish even more narrowed down and specific categories. So if you notice a group of images that are clearly part of a set, keep them together and you can give them their own category name. So for instance, for your holiday photos, you can have your category be Disney World Vacation, 1999, or Christmas, 2003. You are trying to create a system so you can easily go back and find what you were looking for later on. Another thing you're going to want to do while you are sorting images into categories is seriously consider minimizing some of the photos you have. I think this is a misconception with family photograph collections that you have to keep everything. And while getting rid of family photos may seem hard, there are a few basic ways that you can get started. You can get rid of blurry photos or photos where your eyes are closed or images are not fully developed. This is an easy way to gain control over those mass amounts of 4x6 prints and slides you may be storing. Now, while narrowing down your materials is a very subjective task, this will allow you to keep your memories and conserve storage space. And a few things to note: duplicates can be given to family members to fill out their own family collections. They can be used for art projects, or honestly, you can toss them in the trash. I don't typically get rid of 19th century materials and would err on the side of caution of junking materials because you don't know who they are, as you may upset another family member. So you are establishing these categories of your different types of materials, but now you want to know probably how you can store them. So photographs, unlike paper, are more fragile and can deteriorate quickly if they're not handled, displayed, or stored correctly. So I'm going to go over a few basic tips for storage, and then I'll show you even more narrowed down specific storage solutions. So while this seems like common sense, a lot of people mishandle materials. The most common way to damage items is improper handling. So resist the urge to shuffle through your materials. When sorting images, make sure you have your clean workspace and an uncluttered surface. Never stack objects on top of items. Always avoid touching the item's surface. Salts present in your skin can oftentimes damage the image over time. It's best to either wear clean cotton gloves or disposable latex gloves. Both you can find online or at a local drugstore. I have switched from cotton gloves to latex gloves recently because it gives you more dexterity. If you go with cotton gloves, that's fine. I do recommend periodically washing them on delicate so they remain clean of debris. And then never bend or curl or try to flatten curled photos. The uneven pressure can cause tears in the emulsion on the surface to flake off. So when storing materials, remember they are extra sensitive to environmental conditions. You want to make sure your temperature in your home is consistent. You want to make sure that the materials are stored in a cool, dark, dry place. And you want to avoid storing your photographs in the garage, the basement, or the attic. All three of those locations often fluctuate in temperature and humidity. And you can be subject to atmospheric pollutants such as dirt, dust, and bugs. So environment is going to be very important. So is proper storage. Storage helps protect your images from the elements as well, dirt, dust, and light exposure. In an ideal world, we would store our family photographs in archival quality storage boxes in photo sleeves, as seen here in this image. However, archival supplies can be very expensive. So I recommend investing in a few archival supplies for your very old and frail items, such as polypropylene sleeves, which are archival safe plastic, that cover photos, allowing you to hold them and view them without getting your fingers on them. These are not recommended for images that are already damaged, however. I would also recommend investing in some basic photograph storage boxes. If you have the money, acid-free boxes are worth the investment. So an acidic product, such as paper or cardboard, that encounters a photo, ultimately the acid from that paper or cardboard can migrate, causing permanent damage and decay to the image. Therefore, it's very important to use good quality, acid-free, and archival safe materials for the preservation of your family treasures, if and when possible. If you decide to order through Gaylord Archival Supply, make sure to look for the PAT. This is a designation, meaning that it has been tested and is approved to store photographic materials. So here's a few other ways that you can store your materials. The first is going to be in a basic bank box, a banker box, or as we call it in the archive, a record center box. You're next going to want to purchase some photo-safe archival file folders. Now, while the box is going to be acidic, the file folders will ultimately protect and shield your images from that acidity of the box. You then can also later go on and purchase, like this one here, an archival box that is non-acidic. They are very expensive, so this is a more affordable way for you to store a lot of materials and condense it down in an orderly way. What you'll do is you'll establish your categories, and each file folder will then have a file folder number, a basic header or description, what the category is, and then you'll put the group of images within the file. So what I recommend is not overstuffing your files with a ton of materials. Remember that when you pull the file out, you don't want images falling everywhere. So you can put a decent amount of images in here depending on the format, but you do want to be careful not to overstuff the materials in the folder. The next way you can store materials is buying those polypropylene plastic sleeves that I had just mentioned in a Hollinger metal edge box. This is a typical archival box and how we store our photographs here at the Filson. I do prefer the drop front box, as you can see here. This allows you to pull materials in and out of the box much easier. And then photo sleeves. You can buy photo sleeves in all shapes and sizes for the different formats you have. During a recent family project that my husband and I did, that album project, we decided to go with the print file archival storage sleeves. They were a little bit cheaper and you got more sleeves. And they come in a wide variety of sizes, 8x10s, 4x6s, negatives, and slides. So I do recommend determining what supplies you need based off the project you're working on. I don't typically order supplies just to have on hand. It's often per project. So what we did is we counted out what materials we needed. So if I only had 2 8x10s, I may not have ordered sleeves for them and put them in a file folder, but ordered sleeves because I have a ton of 5x7s or 4x6s. And then for those pesky 4x6 prints, which a lot of us have, I recommend getting just a paper craft box. They do sell custom kits through Gaylord Archival Supply Company, but they're often really expensive. So this is a very easy and affordable way for you to store your more contemporary materials by taking them out of those little paper sleeves that they originally came in and were sitting in a box into a more organized system. So as you can see, this image, it's been arranged by year, and then the groupings of images are all within the box. Do try to look for archival or acid-free boxes when possible. I know Michael's Arts and Crafts, I think, sells some. I've also heard the Container Store sells them. This is just a more affordable way to store your more contemporary materials. And remember, you can always go back and upgrade your storage system. You don't need to do it all now. So I kind of pick and choose what's the high priority versus what I can make do with. And then when I have a little bit of more money to put towards the project, I then go in and buy additional archival supplies. Now I want to talk about labeling. It's extremely important to record the information about your materials, but improper labeling can cause damage. So you want to make sure that you use a lead number 2 pencil or softer. If it has a coated surface, which a lot of 4x6 images have that glossy surface, there is a permanent film marking pen that you can use that's archival safe. You never want to use felt tipped pens or ballpoint pens. They can indent the image and often bleed through and damage the item. Another great way is placing your identification on the enclosure. So for smaller items like CDVs, as we have here, oftentimes we will cut down a piece of acid-free paper, use it as a backer within the sleeve, slide the image in the sleeve, and then notate what you'd like the individual's name or dates on that paper enclosure. There are also special marking pens for photo albums. I get a lot of questions about that. There's these white pencils. There's also blue pencils that you can purchase. I do think it's okay if you want to notate within an album who they are. I just wouldn't recommend including all the biographical information on the back of the image or within the album. There's other ways like our spreadsheet to record that. And then always avoid self-sticking labels and tape. If the material already has labels, leave it, but I don't recommend as this as being a good option for labeling. And if you have a lot of information that you want to attach to your image, don't write it on the back. There are lots of great worksheets available where you can add that additional information, such as name, dates, photographer. So I found this really great worksheet out of a book called The Family Photo Detective by Maureen Taylor. She also has one called Uncovering Your Ancestry Through Family Photographs. These are great affordable resources. I believe I bought one for under $30. You can get them on Amazon. The Louisville Free Public Library also has both copies of these books that you may be able to check out as well. And then the last section today that I really want to discuss is going to be how to handle challenging formats. A lot of people have, they can organize things, but then they get these like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. And that can include cased images, photo albums and scrapbooks, slides, and negatives. So these are just a few of the challenging formats that I know exist in a lot of people's collections. So cased images, we have 3 different types of cased images. There's the daguerreotype is the first one. This image is produced on a silver-coated copper plate and is very easily detected, even by someone who has never seen one before. It exhibits the characteristics of a mirror, so when you move the image around, it appears mirror-like. The next type of cased image is called the ambrotype. This was a very short-lived format. The image is produced on glass. It does not have a mirror-like characteristic, and the image, if in good condition, is often very crisp and clear. So as you can see here, these are both in cases. One is in a full case, another has been removed from the case. And this kind of has almost like a milky tone to it. If you held that in person as you rotated the image, you would be able to see him a bit crisper and cleaner. And then the last type of cased items is going to be the tin type. It can often be confused with ambrotypes, given its crispness. And early examples of tin types were cased up until about the early 1860s. But the price of tin dropped so quickly that the case became more expensive than the image itself. So soon they started creating paper sleeves, and you'll see sleeves that have these little windows with the person coming through. They can be bigger than this. This is a gem type. It's a very small, tiny little tin type. They're my favorite. And they can be included in what is called a cartouche envelope. So all three of these formats should never be removed from the cases. They're very delicate, and removing materials can damage them. Also note, as I had kind of already mentioned, these items can be found loose. They can be found with a whole case, or oftentimes this portion, the lid, can just be dismantled. So it's half cased, but not fully cased. So if the case is full and intact, you can wrap them in acid-free paper with some archival tying string, as you see here. If the item has been removed from the case, you can do a few different things. They do make storage sleeves, I believe, for these 4 flat sleeves. Another way is to kind of create little sandwich boards with archival cardstock. You're going to kind of create a support system, one on the bottom, one on the top. You're going to piece it together, and then you're delicately going to wrap the item. If you have uncased tin types, I do recommend being careful with sleeving them or putting them like this, as the image, remember, is printed on tin and can be frail, and the image can flake off. The next thing that I see a lot of in family photo collections is photograph albums and scrapbooks. The 2 most common album formats that I see are the black papered albums that are often frail and crumbly. And then you have the little bit more contemporary self-adhesive albums. Remember, not all albums should be dismantled. For the black paper photo albums, you can often interleave acid-free paper in between. Remember, this is old pulp paper. It's often highly acidic, and it can cause damage to your materials. So if you see some damage on the images, you can just put a sheet of paper over that as you go through the pages. And then the self-adhesive albums, they do still sell these. I looked them up last night. I do not recommend storing your photos this way. Oftentimes the adhesive degrades over time. They can become more sticky, or they can lose their stick altogether and materials start falling out of the albums. So when working with albums, it's best to determine if you can remove the images carefully. I have heard tricks for loosening images for these self-adhesive albums by using dental floss to kind of break the image from the adhesive. I've never tried this, but that was something I have seen other people try. And then I also highly recommend not taking apart albums if the images are fully adhered in, because you can really damage the pictures if you force them out of the album. So this is just kind of using your best judgment. If you think the images can peel away easily and you can create a spreadsheet where you don't lose context of the album, I recommend keeping them together. If not, you can dismantle them. And then the last thing that we find images in are going to be scrapbooks. These are often filled with newspaper clippings, letters, and photos. And they come in all shapes and sizes. I've seen small little ones like this yearbook here. I've also seen really massive albums. So for the album or for the scrapbooks, you can do the same technique with your photos. You can interleave acid-free paper. This is a very affordable way to preserve photos longer, and you can buy this at your office supply store or online. Oftentimes the paper these days will just naturally be acid-free, but they will notate that on the package. So make sure you see that when you're buying your paper. And then as for storing these materials, oftentimes what we will do is we will wrap them in archival tissue paper. They can then be tied up together with a string, almost like a Christmas present. And if you want a little bit extra protection, so for instance, this is a soft covered album, it's not hard. And so to add a little bit more protection, we then place the wrapped item within a drop front box. For scrapbooks, we typically wrap them in a little bit heavier duty paper and tie them up as well. Slides. I know a lot of people have slides in their family collection. My grandfather has a ton of slides, and I think slides and negatives are the hardest things to tackle because there's so many of them. So while slides take a lot of time, one easy tip is to buy a light up tracing table. I don't know if you can see ours here in this photo, but this is a tracing table that I purchased for the Filson. It was $30 on Amazon, and it's way more affordable than a professional photograph light table. This allows you to see the slides, sort through them a little bit faster. You can also get a photograph loop to assist. You can see that here on the table. And I was so lucky, I had, this is an example of a project. So my intern Rashid from the University of Louisville, he's getting his MFA in photography, painstakingly went through the slide collection this spring for me. And you're gonna organize these the same way you would everything else. You're gonna sort through them, establish your categories, and then the easiest way to condense slides down is pulling them out of those old carousels and all those old boxes and putting them in slide sleeves. You can, ultimately what he did is he condensed down this whole box, as you can see over here on the cart, down into 2 photograph albums of slides. And then he labeled the categories at the top of the slide sleeve. So you really condense down these materials. And then the last thing that can be tricky is negatives. Negatives also bring a lot of preservation problems. They are super susceptible to poor climate. And if they're stored incorrectly, like these negatives that I found in my attic, they can often create an off gas that smells like vinegar. We call this vinegar syndrome, and if you start smelling this, it means the materials are slowly starting to degrade. I recommend removing them away from other formats so you can deal with them. And they also come in a lot of different formats. You've got 35 millimeter, you've got 127 film, you've got 120 film. So negatives can be complicated. But housing negatives is just the same as you would house anything else. I recommend housing them in the sleeves, or you can house them loose. So I found recently a group of negatives in our attic as I was cleaning. This was an archivist's dream, and unfortunately they had been cut. So what I did is I took that pile and I pieced them back together, and then I individually sleeved them, because I happen to have leftover sleeves from our family photo album project. Another great way to store negatives is going to be in the sleeves. As you can see here, you can get a lot more 35 millimeters negatives within a sleeve. So by doing this, you're condensing down a lot of boxes into a more organized manner. So that concludes my talk. We are going to stay on for Q&A, and if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm also happy to take emails, so please feel free to email me at hpotter@filsonhistorical.org. I'm always happy to answer any specific family photograph, whether processing or housing questions. So that is it. I am going to unshare my screen if you'll just give me one moment. And we're going to turn the questions back over to you, Dick.
All right. Hello, everybody. And let me bring up the chat feature. But Heather, a question for you with reference to this modern age in which we're living, where people use their iPhones to take pictures of their children or their family members or beautiful scenes or whatever. Are we losing the ability to keep archival records going forward, or is there a way to turn these iPhone pictures rather quickly into prints?
So typically for digital materials, you will store and arrange them almost the same principles. You can create file folders and a naming scheme for your images. As for long-term preservation, there are systems in place here at the Filson that ultimately will take your digital materials, the master files, and they will get placed in what is called dark storage. From there, a checksum is run where they're checking all the little zeros and ones that make up your digital image, and they kind of sit there. And then we have what's called an access copy. So if a researcher wanted to come in to look at the materials, we would pull up the access copy, meaning they could see it without interfering with the master file. So digital images for family photos, though, can be pretty tricky. I too have not fully organized my digital photos. It's one of those daunting tasks that I'm kind of putting off to the side because I don't want to tackle it. But I do recommend going through and applying these same techniques to your digital materials, because if you think about it, we take twice as many photos. When you had film, you then would have to have it developed, and each picture from the very early onset of photography to even more where it became mass produced cost us money to take that image. Whereas digital images, you can take as many pictures as you want at almost no cost.
Keeping originals, this isn't a message to everyone, but I'd like your thoughts on it. Keeping originals is fine, but the problem arises on who gets them. I'm leaning toward digitizing some so all can have copies. What is your opinion?
Yeah, so with my family right now, my mom has the collection and she's waiting for me to get settled into our new house so I can get the family collection. So I recommend designating somebody the family historian or caretaker. And then the easiest way is, like this individual said, is to scan the materials and share the materials digitally. I don't like breaking up family materials because oftentimes I feel like you lose the context of the collection. However, I know that's very common. So it's kind of a preference, but scanning and disseminating materials, that can be a very easy solution for people all wanting that picture of grandma's wedding day.
I know some people have used those scrapbooks that have adhesive backing and then cellophane top. And a lot of them have written fun little notes underneath of who is who and what is what. From what you've said, that's not a very good way to preserve those photographs. What would you recommend? Would you recommend taking a picture of each page so that you have the handwritten notes as well and then file them away? What would be the best procedure?
So as I mentioned, it really depends on the album. If the album's in good shape and you don't see any deterioration happening, you can leave them that way. But long-term, oftentimes the adhesive will wear off and the pictures will then fall out and you'll ultimately lose the context. You know, you've gotten 10 pictures out, what note do they go with? So that's when, if you do decide to dismantle the album, definitely keep that. We call that metadata. that information that my grandma has these albums. We have one for every year, and we probably have 20 or 30 of them, and she notated everybody. So, it's kind of your preference. If you have time to pull them out, great. If you don't have time, leave them, but just periodically keep an eye on them. But the most important thing is you don't want to separate that vital family information. If she's labeled them who the person is, you don't want to lose that. So you'll want to just create an organizational system like the spreadsheet where you're keeping track of all that information.
Here are two very practical questions. Is undo, UN-DU, adhesive remover considered archive safe for removing photos glued onto paper album pages?
So I've never actually used that. Oftentimes, if the image is loose, like you can kind of tell if an image is loose, we will remove them. If they're pretty adhered down, I wouldn't recommend using any additional product to remove it. It's almost best to leave it as is. And you can put acid-free paper over it. You can dismantle the album, but all the pictures are still on the sleeve or on the pages, and then you can sleeve each individual page. There's other ways to do it. I wouldn't recommend bringing in any additional other chemicals because we don't know how it will react with the photochemicals.
Here's another practical question that's everyone's worst nightmare. Is there a way to unstick photos that got wet and stuck together?
No. Ultimately, we all do have them. They can either adhere to that plastic topping in those magnetic albums, or the 4x6s I've seen, if they're not stored correctly and they get too hot or too cold, also ultimately they can fuse together. At that point, you've almost lost the image, unfortunately.
Is there a way to conserve tintypes, which have become so dark over time that it is now difficult to see the images?
So for tintypes, there are ways. You can't stop the progress of the deterioration, but what you can do is capture the image prior to it deteriorating further. So what you could do would be to scan it and do some color correcting so you have a nice, clean, crisp image of it. And then it's crucial then, if it is already fading, is to get it into proper storage and to get it out of light.
Does the Filson collection have many tintypes in it?
Yes, we have lots of tintypes, from those gem types all the way up to full plate tintypes.
What is the best way to digitize old, that is over 50 years old, photographs with a flatbed scanner or iPad scanning app? And does the process harm the photos?
So it will really just depend on what you're scanning. You're going to scan a daguerreotype, way different than if you're scanning contemporary 4x6 print. So oftentimes we will use a flatbed if we think the image can handle it. If not, we have an overhead camera setup that does it. Now I understand this isn't always an option for people at home, but there are other ways of capturing the image.
I have a lot of, this question is from Val. I have a lot of photos on computer disks, CDs. How do I organize them?
So I'd first recommend getting the files off the disks. While this was a popular storage format, it's a very short-term storage format. It's not ideal to have that as your preservation copy. So what I would do is extract the files off and get them onto a cloud-based storage service or an external hard drive to store them that way. Disks can easily get scratched on the back, and right then and there, you can oftentimes lose files.
That takes us really to the end. There have been a number of questions, Heather, on the chat dealing with such things as where can I buy archival materials? Where do I buy scanners, et cetera, et cetera. And I think all of those have been answered. Everybody, I just want to say this about Heather Potter. for those of you who came to the Filson's Enid Yandel exhibition, you're looking at the marvelous professional who put it all together. And for that, I think the entire community had a right to be grateful. And this presentation is emblematic of the more practical side of what Heather does and does so well. We are always happy to take questions, and I know that Heather was absolutely serious when she said, if you have a question, send her an email. And what is your email address?
My email is hpotter, P-O-T-T-E-R, at filsonhistorical.org. And yes, I'm always happy to answer any sort of family photo collection question you may have. So feel free to shoot me an email.
And of course, all of this archiving is a wonderful thing for these COVID-19 times, so have at it. And again, thank you all so much for participating. And Heather?
Yes, thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.